In December 2016, Julia founded Milas Miracle Foundation upon learning that her seemingly healthy 6-year-old daughter Mila had Batten disease, a devastating fatal genetic condition. In an unprecedented race against time to save Mila, Julia's work led to the first ever drug tailored to just one person, Milasen. Driven by a sense of hope and obligation, Julia is on a mission to turn Mila's story into an accessible path for truly personal medicines. Julia, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Emily. I appreciate it. And thank you for letting me tell my daughter's story. 4 years ago, my life changed overnight. My daughter, who was 6 years old at the time, Mila, was diagnosed with a rare genetic disease that had no cure, no treatment, and was given pretty much a death sentence. Up until then, she had lived a very kind of typical Colorado life. You know, she was hiking and skiing and rock climbing like a lot of little Colorado kids, you know, at age 2 and 3 years old. And she had no red flags at any pediatrician appointments. She was just a very outgoing, happy, typical kid. And before I tell you a little bit more about how her life took quite a turn, I thought I would let you get to know her a little bit more. So there's a very short video that I'll show you that introduces you to Mila.
Sunshine, you make me happy when skies are gray.
So our daughter's name is Mila Virginia Makovets. She was born on November 5th, 2010. When I think about Mila as an infant, I think about smiles and laughter and health and...
Half an hour after she was born, she was strong enough to hold on to my finger and I could almost pick her up off the bed.
When Mila was a toddler, she was a climber, she was a hiker, she was a runner.
How old are you, Mila? Here's our sugar high daughter.
Slide, slide, slide.
Very physical, always loved to ride a strider.
Nice, bug.
Play in the snow, go sledding.
Coming!
We noticed that Mila was getting stuck on her words. She would say, "Mommy, Mommy, I have to. Mommy, I have to," and not be able to continue. And then suddenly, around 3 years old, we started noticing that her feet were slightly unturned and she was walking strangely. And then at 4 years old, we noticed that she pulled books in close. And then around 5 years old, Mila's feet started moving really quickly in this strange pit-pattering way, and then she would fall back on her butt. And every time she stood up, she would fall back and stand up and fall back. You know, we took her around to different doctors who never could really kind of figure out what was going on with her. And then time passes, and then in just 1 month, everything can change. She could no longer see anything. What's brought her so much happiness is playing with her toys and or looking at her books and watching TV and playing with her brother, and suddenly it looked like she could no longer play with anything. It's so hard to see such an outgoing little girl not be able to play with other kids and not be able to play with toys and not be able to watch Elmo anymore.
Okay, Julia, back to you.
Thank you. So over the course of about 2.5 years, Mila's symptoms continued to get worse and worse. She had more problems with her vision. She had problems tripping and falling. She would, you know, step on her toys and pull all of her books in close, and no doctor or therapist could figure out what was going on. I brought her to over 100 appointments with doctors and therapists over the course of that kind of diagnostic odyssey, which many rare disease parents can relate to. And at a certain point, I gave up. I brought her into the ER of Children's Hospital, Colorado. I figured that there was no way they could release her until they figured out what the problem was. And sure enough, after an extremely difficult week of tests, exams and MRIs and EEGs and everything you could imagine, Mila was diagnosed with Batten disease, which is a rare genetic disease that is fatal and has no treatment, no cure. And she was diagnosed with a subtype that was extremely rare. So she was, told that we were told there was absolutely nothing we could do. There was almost no one even working on this disease anywhere in the world. And I was given no hope at all. After crying pretty much all day, every day for about a week, I pulled myself off the ground and started researching what other families had done in similar situations with rare diseases. And I learned pretty quickly that parents had to take everything into their own hands. There really wasn't funding for rare diseases. So I was not a fundraiser or a scientist, but I felt like I had to become one overnight. I started a foundation. I started Milas Miracles Foundation, which was a 501c3. I started talking to scientists everywhere in the world. I just read article after article, did not really understand what I was reading at first, started kind of picking up a little bit on the fact that there was just, the beginning of this kind of wave of genetic treatments, but it was really early. And after talking to many, many scientists around the world, I started learning that there was this tiny glimmer of hope. It was early, but it was enough for me to fight for my daughter. So I started this foundation. I learned that the only kind of power I had was telling her story. So I began telling her story to anyone, everyone, to the press. I posted pictures and kind of had people follow Mila's story as it unfolded on social media. And a lot of people started following her story. And I raised, over the course of that first year, a few $1 million in really, truly grassroots efforts with an enormous support from people in Colorado, which I'm incredibly grateful for. A lot of people that didn't know me stood up to help me in every way possible. And the stars really aligned for my daughter in a very unusual way during that year. A team of scientists and doctors in Boston put together a entirely new type of treatment, which was a drug that was customized just to my daughter's very rare mutation. It was a long shot, but it ended up turning into something real. And a year after she was diagnosed, we moved to Boston, and my daughter started receiving a drug that was customized to her, and it was named after her. So it was called Milas. And at the time, we didn't even realize that she was the first person in the world to receive a truly individualized drug. In the first year of Mila's treatment, it was unbelievable. She was spiraling downhill. She had lost her vision completely. She had lost all of her words. She was barely able to stand. She had a G-tube or feeding tube put in. She could no longer eat by mouth, but she was still smiling and laughing. And still in time to do our very best to try to see if we could stop her disease. And in the first year of her treatment, we saw not only stabilization, but we saw incredible improvements. She started eating by mouth again. Her 30, pretty serious seizures a day went down to pretty much nothing. She was able to hold her body up and lift her feet to take steps up the stairs with great support from behind, by myself. And, she started smiling and laughing and becoming more herself again. And it really blew everyone away, the doctors, our family, everyone. It's been 3 years since she's been on her treatment. And in the second and third years, her disease started progressing, but very, very slowly. So it greatly slowed her disease progression. And going into this, we all knew she was 7 years old when she started receiving her treatment, which is pretty progressed for a child with her type of Batten disease. And I was told that, while this drug looked incredibly promising on her cells in the lab, that this was the first time it was being done, and we had a lot to learn. And we've learned that it is incredibly promising. But the reality is that we don't know what Mila's future holds. And we do know that her story, which started here in Colorado, is really making a huge impact on medicine around the world. It's showing what's possible. It's showing that taking, individualized approach to rare disease and coming up with individualized drugs is an entirely new way of treating rare disease. It needs to get faster and better and cheaper and be able to scale in order to make a big impact. But I am extremely committed to turn everything that was put into my daughter's treatment by hundreds of people in science and medicine, into a way of changing the way that we look at drug development for rare disease. I wake up at night because I can't sleep because there are 60 million, estimated 60 million children around the world that are suffering from just rare, fatal, and life-threatening genetic diseases alone. And there are no treatments. I mean, there's a handful of very lucky kids that have had some form of genetic treatment in these early days. But we need to be more innovative, and we need to be more aggressive while still being safe, and come up with solutions, because it blows my mind that there are 60 million families out there dealing with the incredible amount of pain and impact on my daily life, every minute of my life. And they're all dealing with this, and there's just no hope. There's no funding for rare disease treatments. And the exciting news that probably won't benefit my life and my family is that these treatments are looking promising. There was almost nothing going on 4 years ago when Mila was diagnosed. Now there's so much going on, and it's exciting, but we need to make sure that children are diagnosed earlier. If Mila had been treated even months earlier, before a lot of her symptoms came on, who knows where she would be today. And we need to make sure that funding is allocated to rare disease treatments. They may look rare. My daughter has there's about 30 people in the world that have her subtype of Batten disease, but there are enormous similarities and learnings across all of these different rare diseases, and there are enormous learnings across the treatments. And Mila's type of treatment is a platform approach. It's something that could, an individualized drug, pretty much A to Z, from designing the drug to the treatment, looks the same, except for one piece, which is this little piece of the code that changes depending on the child. And that platform approach could make an enormous impact in numbers across all of these thousands of rare diseases. But we need the funding to be able to treat more children and learn more, and hope that those treatments give those children a second chance at life, and also allow scientists and doctors to learn and improve these treatments so that they can then be used as a platform and give, more, eventually 1% and then 5% and maybe 10% and growing, of these tens of millions of children that have no option and whose families' lives fall apart at the seams every single day. And so, thank you for listening to Mila's story. It's a pretty amazing story, and it's unique in many ways, but in other ways it's not unique. And unfortunately, there are behind closed doors that you don't see. There are tens of millions of parents like me that cry, in their closets with their doors shut, and they don't necessarily talk about the pain they go through with everyone in their lives, but they're there, and they need help. They need funding, and they need earlier diagnosis to be able to really make a difference. So thank you, Emily, and thank you everyone for listening to my daughter's story.